welcome. I'm glad to be here with you. This is an offering for Taurus season. My name is Renee. I am one of the space tenders at Embodied Astrology, and I've been offering readings, horoscopes, and overviews for collective astrology for almost a decade through Embodied Astrology. And I'm here today on Thursday, April 18th, to give a reading for the collective for Taurus season. Taurus season begins tomorrow, April 19th, and it ends on May 20th. Taurus season is the period of time in which the Earth in its orbit around the sun starts to receive the light of the sun, that is the light of Taurus. In the Northern Hemisphere, this is springtime. We have arrived. In the Southern Hemisphere, this is autumn. Taurus as an energetic quality is a quality that we can all resonate with. All of us have all 12 signs living and expressing in our bodies. Taurus as an energetic quality is a quality that we can attune with in the world. And in my practice, I really value the kind of reading of astrology that is embodied, that's experiential, that is as open as it can possibly be. That's one of my intentions for your interpretation and meaning making. I also value astrology that helps us contextualize what's happening in the world and helps us ground in our experience. As a queer person and as a person that really is doing my best to be as engaged as I can with the world and with my own healing and processes of liberation, I resonate with astrology in symbolic ways that help me feel and think into the moment, into my life in this moment. And my hope is that anything that I can offer would be supportive for you to feel and think into your life in this moment. I said a moment ago that I really value astrology that is open and you can make the meaning that is meaningful for you. And I mean that. And I'm going to talk about astrology in some different ways in this reading. But one of the ways that I am going to talk about astrology is with my own meaning making. And I'll just say that up front. I'll use astrology today to help myself make sense of this moment. And my consciousness is politicized in some ways. It is definitely queer. And as I mentioned, I'm seeking my own healing and liberation. So I'll bring in themes that feel resonant and relevant to me with current astrology, and they may or may not feel resonant and relevant to you. What I'm offering is just one little whisper of a chorus of ideas that go on in my mind, heart, body all the time. In the time that I have, I'm only going to be able to say certain things, and there's a lot that I won't say, and there's a lot that I'll say in certain ways, and later I would probably wish that I would have said it a different way. And I just am going to let that be that. So take what works and leave the rest. Make the meaning that's meaningful for you. And remember that astrology is one of our most ancient languages. Astrology has existed throughout civilizations across the world since human beings began to create civilizations. It is a practice of attunement with the natural cycles of the earth and the cosmos. It is a storytelling practice and a practice of both divination and myth making and meaning making. It is a timekeeping practice. And so like many storytelling practices and many myth-making practices, it helps us remember what has happened. And it also can help us prepare for what could happen and give us some sense perhaps of what is happening at present. And the symbolism of astrology is vast. It is totally impossible to learn everything that there is to learn about astrology in a single lifetime. So I am really hoping and praying for the opportunity to reincarnate and keep learning this language. And I want to give a bow and deep gratitude to my teachers and ancestors and the lineages that I come from with this practice. I'm a second generation astrologer and embodied astrologer. My first teacher was my mom, Dee Moulton, who actually had Jupiter in Taurus. And I have a moon in Taurus. And my godmother, Clarissa, who is still alive, my mother has passed, also has Jupiter in Taurus and is also an astrologer. And both my mother and godmother were and are embodiment practitioners and healers. And I really feel this lineage through my moon. And I'm very grateful to them for what they've taught me. Very grateful to all of their teachers and the many wonderful teachers that I've been able to study with in my life. And with that, I'm going to look at my notes because they're going to help keep me organized in this reading. And yeah, I'll say also that embodied astrology is so much more than these kinds of readings. It is a place. You can visit it on the internet at embodiedastrology.com. And we have a community there. There is a robust and growing and creative community of people who want to engage with astrology through embodiment, through experimentation, through exploring our lived experiences through the lens and language of astrology. And a lot of the work that we do there and the practices that we do are invested in exploring the myths and the symbols and also updating them, queering them, getting creative with them, and considering where they have come from and also where they might be going. And so please come check us out. Just the other day, I recorded in the company of my teaching team. This year, Embodied Astrology has a teaching team of 5 people, including Sherri Taylor, Junauda Petrus, Gabs 404, and Ramon Gabrielaf Parrish, and myself. And over the course of 2024 and into 2025, we are kind of taking the lead with facilitating EA's offerings. And a lot of what we're doing is very participatory and invites you and others to come and make the meaning with us around what astrology can be. And the other day we recorded a collective reading for a really important headlining event this year, which is the conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus, which happens in 2 days from now, from when I'm recording, on April 20th. That is a once every 14-year astrological event. It doesn't always happen in Taurus. It happens to be there this year in this cycle. And there is a lot of significance inside of that event. Over the course of this reading, I'll definitely be referencing that influence and those energies, but I'm actually going to use this time to feel more into Taurus season as a whole. And so if you're interested in tuning in with our collective reading and also with the conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus, I will include the link to check out our video or podcast, whichever one you prefer, in the show notes. And that collective reading was made as the opening for the Electric Black Earth Festival, which is an astrological Afrofuturist pop-up festival that's happening right now as I'm recording this on the ground in Denver and Boulder, Colorado, and also online. And by the time you get this transmission that I'm recording, the festival will be over, but there will be some recordings of the virtual events, including a somatic practice that I'll be leading on tomorrow morning. So the morning of April 19th, the first day of Taurus season, which is a somatic practice to remember how our bodies really are made of star stuff and the incredible brilliance and also expansive blackness of space that lives inside of all of us, and how in practices of liberation now, reconnecting with those intelligences and memories can assist us in some of the work that we may be doing. There will also be a recording available of Junauda's reading and writing workshop based on her award-winning YA novel, The Stars and the Blackness Between Them. Junauda is an amazing facilitator, has such a generous practice with astrology and also with writing and with art. And over the course of 2024, she is facilitating monthly full moon gatherings, artistic alchemy gatherings, coordinated with the full moons. So every month you can tune in on Zoom in our virtual space with Junauda for a sensory, exploratory, creative sharing experience that looks at the full moon and its polarity and axis in the body. Over the course of this year, we have a lot going on, and I'll probably be talking about some of the other events that are coming up and beginning in Taurus season. But just for now, I do also want to give a nod to Sherri Taylor, who over the past 2 years has been facilitating with Embodied Astrology, particularly around Saturn's transit through Pisces, which I'll also be referencing in this reading. And the work that Sherri is doing is very much invested in this practice of myth making and regeneration of myths. And as she's working with the myth of Saturn, she is working to remember and expand that myth by weaving in the femme faces of Saturn. And if you are familiar with astrology at all, and certainly if you're familiar with mythology and the myth of Saturn or the myth of Kronos, you're probably familiar with Saturn as a very patriarchal figure. But Saturn in the mythic root and in the archetypal root is not gendered and includes a very deep essence of what I would say is the great feminine or the divine mother. And of course, Saturn is a planet, and Saturn is its own body and its own being that we can also relate with through science, through chemistry, through aesthetic observation, etc. And in her facilitation, Sherri has been talking a lot about boundaries and really listening to our body's needs to reflect and rest. And I honor her right now as an inspiration and influence for me to shift a little bit in how I'm doing readings over the course of the next couple of months. And if you've been following EA for a while, then you might be familiar with me having a monthly rhythm of putting out horoscopes for all 12 signs. And I'm still doing that, but I'm going to change a little bit of the ways that I'm creating. And the need for change, I think, is a need that all of us are going through right now and probably struggling with. If you're anything like me, it can be really hard to break out of what is your normal and what feels like a steady or stable pattern, especially stable patterns that might have something to do with your sustenance and survival, as mine does, being my job. But I can feel that my own needs to evolve as an astrologer, as an artist, and as a human being need me to shift my rhythm so that I can attend to other elements of my practice and also get a different kind of space inside of my practice so that I can show up for these readings with continued growth, not kind of just getting stuck in my own patterns. So I want to thank Sherri for that and also encourage you to check out her work. Over the course of 2024, she's working with devotional cycles with the femme faces of Saturn. and the next devotional cycle begins on June 29th. And you will be doing yourself a treat, giving yourself a treat if you tune in with Sherri, and especially if you, like me, are someone who might be struggling a little bit to know and sense your own boundaries, to take care of your body and corporeal needs, and to integrate your devotional practices and longings. This is a really powerful and potent space for that. All right, so that's my preamble. Enough housekeeping. Let's get into this reading. So I'm going to begin with a reading of the chart for the sun's ingress, which is actually the Earth's ingress into Taurus. And then I'm going to shift over to reading a map of the astrological flow across linear time for Taurus season. I'm going to share my screen so that you can enjoy the visuals with me. And as I offer all of this, please also feel free to just close your eyes, relax, get into your body. And again, let any symbolism that's offered here flow into your senses. There's nothing to grasp, really. I really want to open this space with an intention of non-completion. And whatever emerges in this moment, I hope emerges in a way that is deeply satisfying, nourishing, and supportive to my highest good, to your highest good, and for the highest good of all. So, Taurus season, here we go. The sun has come into the sign, the earth has come into the sign. We are in the element of fixed earth with Taurus season. The element of fixed earth brings us into the corporeal realm, into the weight of our bodies, and into materiality as it is right now, in its density, in its material intelligence, in its ongoing evolution and fertility, and in its fertility, in its possibility for evolution and creation, there is also always the presence of transformation, which is another way of saying death. Taurus is one part of an axis that includes the sign Scorpio, and many astrologers feel into zodiacal polarity as a necessity. So we can't read Taurus without reading Scorpio. We can't read Scorpio without reading Taurus. They are two parts of the same whole. And the Taurus-Scorpio axis very fundamentally is an axis of life and death. And wherever we have life, we have the presence of death. And in order to have the presence of death, of course, we must have also the presence of life. In reading Taurus and the material and the now and the present, there are themes that come up when we are experiencing life. And of course, life wants to live. Life wants to sustain itself. Life seeks abundance. Life seeks sweetness. It seeks stability and safety and security. And all of us in our bodily existence need these things. Without some amount of stability, we cannot survive. The moon is exalted in Taurus, and what that means astrologically is that the moon in Taurus has a lot of the resources that it needs to express its lunar nature. And the lunar nature is rhythmic. Everything that you do in your life that is about rhythm and care is lunar. And so that includes feeding yourself and others. It includes sleeping. It includes any kinds of cycles of going out and then returning to what feels like home. The moon organizes life on our planet, literally, in its orbit around the Earth. It actually influences the Earth's spin on its own axis. If we did not have the moon, the Earth would spin too fast to support and sustain life. And of course, you know that the moon is very deeply linked to the waters of Earth, and water is life on Earth. So the presence of water in the presence of soil give rise to potentiality and fertility from which life emerges. So here we are in Taurus season, and I just want to invite you to feel your body for a moment, and I'm going to tune in with mine. Taking a breath is a great way to tune in with your body. From the time that we're born until the time that we die, breath is our constant companion. And as we breathe, we are being breathed. Breath is a language of relationship. We couldn't breathe without plants and trees, and plants and trees couldn't breathe without animals. We are animals here alive on Earth, part of life, part of creation on Earth. So as you breathe and notice your breath, let your breath help you settle into your own weight. And let's together just feel where our bodies are closest to the earth. And you might be in a high-rise apartment building. You might be separated from the soil by concrete or carpet. There might be a lot of layers between you and the ground. But the gravity that moves through your body also moves to the ground. And so if you just follow that force, you might imagine that you can reach all the way into the earth. And as we sense our connections to earth, let's just take a couple of breaths and remind ourselves that life is fleeting and temporary. Really inviting in the spirit of non-completion, the feeling that we're not going to be here forever. And with that, there is no finish line. There's no perfect goal. Our lives are going to be what they're going to be. Most of what creates our lives is entirely outside of our control. And as you join me, if you want to, in this honoring of chaos and surrender, just taking a couple of breaths also with gratitude. And it could be gratitude for this breath. It could be gratitude for a moment of beauty that you've experienced in your life. It could be gratitude for the knowing that your life won't last forever. It could be gratitude for the lives of others that are deeply a part of your own life, important inside of your own life. Taurus as an energy responds very well to sensing, to slowing down, to connecting with earth, and to noticing where there's abundance. Taurus as an energy wants its needs met. And though many of us struggle to meet our needs or to feel that our needs can be met, to honor Taurus, we might also practice sensing into where our needs are already met, and even using our imagination to expand into a space where our bodies can resonate with the feeling and qualities that might be there if all of our needs were met. And if you just take a moment right now to imagine that, imagine what it would feel like if all of your needs were met right now. Can you imagine what might emerge as potential for you in the ways that you're in relationship with yourself, with the various components of your life, with other living beings, with desires, with goals, etc.? So as we begin Taurus season, we are beginning also with an important event. And this event is the conjunction of Mercury and Venus. And I'm realizing as I'm looking at this chart that I have actually cast the chart for the conjunction of Jupiter-Uranus. So a little bit after the beginning of Taurus season, but it's okay, we're going to roll with it. The moon is still in Virgo as Taurus season begins. The day that Taurus season begins on the 19th, excuse my mistake here with the 20th, but the day that the Taurus season begins, Mercury and Venus form a conjunction. And you can see Mercury here, this little figure with the antenna sprouting out of its head, and Venus here, this very familiar symbol that is often associated with the feminine as an energetic principle. So when two planets conjoin, and Jupiter and Uranus are conjunct as well on this day, their energies merge, and their influences then are coiled or combined into one another as they flow into our consciousness. We are beginning Taurus season while Mercury is retrograde. Mercury is retrograde about 3 times a year. A retrograde cycle is a visual phenomena that appears to us here on Earth because we are traveling at different speeds and different distances around the sun than other planets are. And so Mercury, as the closest planet to the sun, travels quite quickly around the solar body. I think Mercury takes about 88 days to complete its orbit around the sun, which is significantly shorter than the Earth's 365 days. And so what happens is that several times a year, the alignment between Earth and Mercury and the sun creates a situation where it appears that Mercury starts to move backwards, or it goes the opposite way of its usual normal, because it's one of the visible planets and we can observe it in its orbit in the sky. And most of the time it's going one way, but then a couple of times a year it seems to pause and kind of hang out stationary in the sky for several days, and then actually it looks like it's going backwards. This is not what the planet is actually doing. It's like if you are in a car next to a train, you know, and the speeds are different, and then it looks like the train is going backwards, or it feels like you're going backwards, or something like that. So because astrology is a symbolic, creative language, astrologers interpret the symbols in an embodied way, as well as an experiential way. And over the course of literally thousands of years, astrologers have been observing retrograde phenomena and what happens during retrogrades. So Mercury as a symbol is associated very much with consciousness and perception. It's associated with intellect and communication. As the closest planet to the sun, it is also associated with the concept of the part of our consciousness that moves between what we might consider our superconsciousness or spirit or higher self, and what we might consider our egos or our mind consciousness. In the myth of Mercury or Hermes, or some of its of their other names, Mercury is known as a trickster being who traverses between the lands of the living and the lands of the dead quite frequently. And Mercury has hermetic powers to morph and shapeshift and make meaning from pulling content or information from one place into another place. And often how our intellect works and how our perception works is tricky, right? And so even a retrograde phenomena, this is a trick. It looks like it's going backwards, but it's not. And during the time that it goes backwards, people often experience retrograde phenomena in their own lives. And retrograde phenomena could feel like things are going backwards a little bit, or they're not going forwards, or they get stuck and they slow down and they're not behaving in the ways that we expect them to behave. People observe all kinds of mishaps with communications and plans and technologies. These are all realms that Mercury is associated with. And I've certainly observed that during Mercury retrograde cycles, my thinking process often needs to go backwards for a while. And what this feels like to me is that I can't move forwards. So I might feel stuck with certain things. I might not feel like I have enough information, or I don't have the answers, or I start to question something and I have doubts or misgivings about a particular kind of direction. The RE prefix is often prescribed for Mercury retrogrades. This is a great time to remain with something if you're not really ready to move forward with it. And while you remain with a thing, why not reflect on it? Maybe there's something that you need to remember or retrieve. Potentially, you might want to revise. Some of us might need to reclaim, right? There might be a regeneration that is necessary. Mercury, as we begin Taurus season, is in the sign of Aries. And Aries is an energetic quality that likes to move fast, and it is very associated with the sense of individuated selfhood. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, everybody has all 12 signs in their chart. And so if you take a moment and just say your own name to yourself, like you would be if you were introducing yourself to someone else, I am Renee, right? I am, say I am, and then claim something about yourself. I am Renee, right? I am 5 feet tall and 6 3/4 inches, right? I'm going to claim that 3/4 for myself. In the I am and in the I statements, there is a solidifying of individuated identity. Individuation is essential for us as we navigate through our lives because we live in separate bodies. We have to individuate from the people who birth us at some point. There's a whole cognitive, developmental, psychological, and physiological process that people go through when they're about 2 years old that is about differentiating. And in differentiation, we learn to say no. And we also learn to reach for what we want. And these primary fundamental principles of attraction and aversion and individuation are very strongly anchored in the Aries energetic. And so when you consider the meaning of Mercury retrograde in Aries, you might consider how your self-concept and individuated identity might be in some kind of need for reflection right now. Maybe there is a redefinition of your identity that you are working on. I used the word reclaim a moment ago. There might be aspects of your identity that you need to reclaim and integrate in order to move forward at this time. So Aries is an individuated, differentiated energetic pattern. It has a very strong association to attraction and aversion, magnetism, what pulls us and pushes us, what we want and what we don't want. And in that, its energetic pattern also has a lot to do with assertion and initiation. How do we mobilize and move towards what we want or don't want? Mobilization and desire, attraction and aversion resonate in parts of our consciousness that are deeply primal and animal. And so Aries is also a very instinctual kind of energetic pattern, and it has a lot to do with survival. It is the youngest sign of the zodiac, or the first sign of the zodiac. And in this, it is a metaphor for the parts of ourselves that are always just being born, right? Are always arriving in a world that is massive and confusing and oftentimes terrifying. And in a material world where we have a lot of times to fight for survival or labor for survival or reach for what we want and get away from what we don't want in order to survive. So these instinctual patternings around survival are very important when we're considering Aries energy. Now, I'll also say that these energetic patterns are primal, and they can become very much threaded in. They are very much threaded in to our consciousness as we mature and as we age. But they will stay primal always, right? Because it's our primitive brain, it's our instinctual reflexes that are getting activated when we're thinking about Aries energetics. How we work with individuation and differentiation can certainly mature. We can become a lot more conscious of it. And I think that this particular Mercury retrograde might be offering some medicine around those kinds of processes. Now, Mercury stationed retrograde at 28 degrees of Aries, and it will station direct at 15 degrees of Aries. So if you have a chart that has placements between 15 and 28 degrees of Aries, then this particular Mercury retrograde is an especially important one for you to take note of. And you'll want to be considering the meaning and significance of any planets or angles that you might have in that degree range. Now, I work with Sabian symbols, which is the study of each particular degree has its own meaning. And so inside of any sign, there are 30 degrees. And the 28th degree of Aries has a particular kind of meaning, as does the 15th degree. And so the meaning that I am making around this retrograde from 28 back to 15 is a meaning that has to do with coming into awareness of when we are doing too much. And there's a feeling here of failure a little bit that is the result of taking on more than we can handle, or trying to please like an audience or please an external source. And in that, kind of being pulled out of our authenticity or integrity in some ways. And it is necessary to regroup and recover our energy during this retrograde cycle. And there's something about resting and retreating that is really important in this cycle in order so that we can come back to our kind of more primal potency and life force, and get out of our heads and into what feels much more like a bodily instinct that responds to the current of life as it moves through each of us. And so I'd love to invite you to just reflect on the month of April. Mercury stationed retrograde on April 1st, and there's also a thing called the Mercury shadow period. And this is the time when Mercury is traveling direct over the area of sky that it will retrograde back to, and so you can think even into mid-March. But reflect for yourself about whether there are ways that you have been coming into consciousness around your energy, your energetic output, and how in your output you may be trying to survive, right? And doing all the things that you need to do. A lot of us are, we have to hustle. There may be feelings or patterning and behavior inside of survival that have you in a space of competition and scarcity, where individuation is actually acting more as an isolating factor, where you might feel unsupported in various ways. And over the course of the retrograde, something might need to happen to slow you down and to provoke some kind of reflection on where your energy is going, how it is being expended, what your actual desires are, and how you may have been reacting impulsively, either moving hastily towards attraction or away from aversion, without really taking time to pause and consider if that movement was really serving you in the best ways. Mercury, as I mentioned, will station direct at 15 degrees of Aries, and this station happens on April 25th. But before it stations direct, it is forming this conjunction with Venus on April 19th. Now, Venus is a very important energy to consider when we're thinking about Taurus, because Venus is at home in Taurus. And in the language of tropical astrology, we're considering where the planets are coming from, where their domiciles are. And sometimes there's language of rulership, which I'm personally trying to get away from, just, trying to decolonize my own language and my own mind. So sometimes I might say the emissary or the associated planet. So Venus is at home in both Taurus and Libra, and Venusian qualities resonate very deeply with both of these signs. Venus as an energy is a relational, bonding kind of force. Venusian energy corresponds first and foremost with the language of the body. And so when I invited us to feel our body's contact with the ground, I was inviting us to actually feel relationship, to feel a bond, to feel a sense of safety and belonging. When I invited us to feel that our breathing happens in reciprocity with other life forms here on Earth, I was also inviting us to feel that life here on Earth is a space where we belong, that our breathing is part of a collective breath. And our bodies, again, need to feel stability. They need to feel safety. If we don't have stability and safety for very long, our physical, emotional, and mental health will start to deteriorate rapidly. And so Venus, in its association with Taurus, really speaks to bodily sensory need and instinct. Venus, in its relationship to Taurus, needs pleasure. It needs rest. It needs the rest and digest kind of experience in the nervous system, right? The balance of the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic state. Venus, in its relationship to Libra, which is the opposite sign of Aries, is Venus in a more conceptual space. And Libra, as an air sign, is a symbol of relationship, particularly the concepts that we have of relationship and the ways that we navigate relationship through the exchange of information. And so again, we have some themes around communication coming up. Libra can be associated with society and social norms, with the roles that we embody inside of our social groups. It can talk about the expectations and assumptions that we have for ourselves and one another, and the social contracts that we keep that ideally help us to harmonize inside of relational groups, whether that is a dyadic group, like in a partnership, whether it's a familial group, or a larger group like a societal group. These social contracts that we keep are behavioral contracts, and we learn to behave in certain ways because we are taught to behave in those ways. And a lot of times we learn to behave in ways that are not really aligned with how our bodies naturally want to be. And when you look at the relationship between Taurus and Libra in this chart, you can see that they are they're in a 150-degree relationship with one another. So Taurus and Scorpio are part of an axis, a 180-degree axis, and Libra and Aries are part of a 180-degree axis. But Libra and Taurus are 150 degrees from one another. And astrologically, this is called a quincunx or an inconjunct. Sometimes it's also called an aversion. And there's an idea here that it's not always easy for signs in this configuration to see or understand one another. And some of the symbolism here around Taurus and Libra in their relationship to Venus has to do with the ways that we are socialized. And we are socialized to be out of our bodies a lot of the times. And sometimes, being out of our bodies or being in kind of discernment or in control of our bodies is totally necessary, right? And you can think about all kinds of circumstances where your body might have an impulse. And actually, if you were to enact that impulse, it could be harmful, it could be dangerous, it could be deeply embarrassing. There might be reasons to not do the thing. But there are also ways that we are socialized to really disembody and disassociate from our corporeal intelligence in order to upkeep social contracts. And that's something I'm going to be talking about definitely throughout this reading. So currently, Venus is in the sign of Aries. Now, Aries is the opposite of Libra, and so Venus in this placement is considered to be in a space where Venusian qualities are not really supported. So if we're thinking about Libra as a place of relationship and harmonizing and knowing how to get along with one another, Aries as an energetic that is about individuation and differentiation and me, myself, and I, and attraction and aversion and moving towards what I want, and often moving quickly or instinctually. We might understand how Venus in this placement sometimes might act in ways that don't totally support the social contracts. And sometimes that's going to look like rebellion and fighting for freedom, or it might look like attraction to freedom. People who have natal Venus in Aries are often people who are highly attracted to their own personal sense of freedom, and the kinds of relationships that they want are relationships that feel liberating and freeing and exciting and adventurous. These are people often also who like the chase. It's like they want to get hot chasing someone. So when we're reading for a collective chart, we might just consider that, this is a period of time when social contracts are under a large amount of strain. And the strain here is the strain of individuated, kind of polarized energetics. And Aries, as an individuated energy, is not about upkeeping the social contract, right? Aries as an instinctual energy is an energy that fights sometimes, or maybe it flees, right? It runs away, but it's not necessarily about fawning and appeasing. And I'm using trauma language right here because that's going to be important in terms of what I'm going to talk about in a moment. And in this reference to trauma language, I'll also say that, all of the signs have their trauma patterns and their healing patterns. And so a healing pattern of Aries is healthy differentiation. It is the capacity to fight and to fight well. And to fight well actually requires us to stay in relationship, right? There is a lot of value in being able to have healthy conflict. And actually later this year at Embodied Astrology, Ramon and myself will be co-facilitating and joined with some pretty amazing presenters who work in the field of conflict transformation. And we're offering a series called Constellations of Conflict to help us feel into the need for healthy conflict and also utilize astrology in that exploration. And if you want more info, embodiedastrology.com is the place. So healthy conflict is necessary. We need to be able to push back. We don't always agree with one another. We do have a lot of differences. We have different needs, and there's space for that. We don't need homogenous societies. We know from agricultural examples that monocropping absolutely depletes the soil. It takes away all fertility and creativity and abundance. So we need difference. Difference helps us survive, right? This is healthy Aries energy, is to differentiate. But inside of our differences, we also need to be able to respect one another, to treat each other with dignity, to find middle paths, right? To find places where, all parties are able to help care for one another and be cared for in order to get their needs met. So as we move into Taurus season, the emissary of Taurus, right? The housekeeper of the land of Taurus, the one who's kind of in charge of this domain, is in a sign where stability is really challenged because there is instinctual energetic patterning that has us maybe moving towards fight and flight. There is also a kind of process that we're in right now as Venus comes into contact with Mercury retrograde of reflecting on our own energy, on our own needs, how we want to output what we think is important, what is worth fighting for, what's worth going for, where maybe it's better to retreat or change course or something like that. And then you can see that right next to Venus, we have this symbol that looks like a little K with a circle under it. This is the symbol for Chiron. Chiron is a centaur body. The centaur class planets are planetary bodies that have highly elliptical and irregular orbits. All of them are orbits that go all the way out into the spheres of the outer planets and then come back into the spheres of the kind of classical planets or the visible planets. Chiron's orbit goes out to the distance of Uranus orbit and comes back into the realm of Saturn's orbit. And in this signification, there is meaning with Chiron that has to do with bringing awakening processes into the body and into the corporeal. Awakening processes are often painful, and especially with Chiron, we're working with a myth and a mythic figure that is sometimes called the wounded healer. And Chiron's first wound actually comes from separation and abandonment and rejection. And when Chiron is in Aries, which by the way is one of the signs where it hangs out the longest, and because of its elliptical orbit, it will move very quickly through certain signs and very slowly through others. And I believe that it entered Aries in 2018. I think that it's here till 2026. And so this is one of the places where Chiron spends the longest amount of time. And so with Chiron and Aries, I read this as a symbol of the pain of disconnection and separation, and the wound patterns of separation and disconnection, as well as the learning and the processes of healing that we undertake. And Chiron is always considered to be a generational kind of placement. And in this, it's bringing content forward every single generation. It has a 50-year orbit around the sun. And so we might feel into, relationships with our parents or grandparents, and think about how across generational time, um, probably all of us in all of our lineages have been harmed by wounds of separation and disconnection. We are living on Earth at a time when there has been incalculable loss, and loss of homeland, loss of family, loss of identity, due in large part to colonial violence and to the influences of European white supremacy and patriarchy, as they have formed and invested themselves in capitalism. But in many isms, right? There are communist and socialist countries out there that are also oppressing and asserting a kind of separation as well. Separation from, one's personal sense of autonomy or dignity. There have been projects around forced removal that extend certainly beyond, white supremacy. I'm thinking about, forced removal of Tibetans, for example, by the Chinese government. And without getting too much into the weeds of what I can or cannot remember about history, I want to invite us to feel into our own lineages and consider how our ancestors have been affected by separation and disconnection. And so this might be separation from homeland or from family. It could be disconnection from body or bodily sovereignty. There are so many ways that we get separated and disconnected from creation, from life force, from vitality, from joy, from sense of belonging. And when we're working with Chiron, we are working with healing journeys, which are also painful journeys. And if you have ever undergone a journey that is about healing yourself, then you know that part of that journey necessitates you going to the source of the pain and trying to work at that source. And so Venus with Mercury and Chiron all here, I'm going to say that we are living at a time when the collective consciousness is deeply, deeply wounded, and conscious of its wounding and enacting its wounding of separation and disconnection. And that as these wounds become more conscious in our collective intelligences, we also have more agency with which we can move towards healing. It has been heartbreaking and profound for me over the course of the last 7 months, since October 7th, as this, ongoing assault on Palestinians and Gazans has been underway. And I say ongoing because it didn't start, of course, on October 7th. This is a longer project, at least 75 years. But it's not just Zionist Israel assaulting Gaza, it's also the United States, right? Fully funding this project. And the United States did just what Israel did. The founding fathers and the pilgrims or mission settlers and, whoever came to this land and under an assertion of supremacy, genocided and erased and wiped out and stole, and continues to do that to this day, right? And continues to enforce and erect militarized borders. And in that project, which now we're, in the 5th century of it, it's like ongoing, there has been an atmosphere, an environment created that has pervaded the entire world. And I entertain myself frequently by imagining what could have happened if that didn't happen. But the truth is it did, and I can't know what would have happened instead. I do know that the instinct to other is very much a human instinct, and that instinct is animal and it's primal, and it comes out of survival instinct, animal survival instinct. I do know that human beings across histories of civilization have sought sense of belonging through group identity, and that often a group identity is formed around notions of supremacy. And so it might be that, the group identity is centered around some kind of religious affiliation or a nationality, or maybe a pigmentocracy, right? Like a group identity of lighter skinned, less melanated people is a kind of group identity, right? And that could spread out across the entire world. And oftentimes, group identities fortify themselves in what they are against or opposed to. And I'm going to say that this is trauma bonding, right? And it happens on small levels as well. It will happen, I don't know if you've ever been in that kind of relationship, right? I think a lot of quite dysfunctional relationships begin because people bond over what they are both against, right? Or they bond over some kind of source of shared identity that is in opposition to something else. And that kind of identity structure ultimately entirely relies on binary thinking in order to continue to exist and support itself. And when I read this astrology, I feel the incredible fracturing and divided, divisive consciousness that is permeating the globe right now, that is everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. And it's between all kinds of different groups of people, where one group of people is fighting another group of people. One group of people is terrorizing another group of people. Many groups of people are resisting and they are fighting back, and they have every right to fight back if they are being terrorized, if they are being genocided, erased, etc. But the instinct to collect and to turn against and to fight against is an instinct that, while it is very natural and human inside of our instinctual animal bodies, it has also been manipulated and distorted and massively inflated because of what has happened, because of living in a world where this is the kind of dominant energy. We do not live in a world that allowed a lot of perhaps more indigenous cosmologies to flourish and become dominant ways of thinking that might honor relationality and reciprocity and feel humanness as one element of livingness inside of an environment. Those worldviews have not been elevated as the dominant worldview. What has been elevated is white supremacy, is patriarchy, is male supremacy, is violent supremacy. What has been elevated are distorted ideas of heroism and a kind of success that has to do with brute strength and dominance. And to me, this feels very much like shadow Aries material. And Aries classical symbol is up here, Mars. I'll talk about Mars in just a moment. But Mars, of course, is often the symbol that people use to point to masculine energy. And I use the terms feminine and masculine with caution because I actually don't want to use them to only refer to people with the assigned genitals that might, go with those terms. But these are energetic patterns. And so if we think about Aries energy or martial Mars energy and masculine energy as being an energetic pattern that is asserting, that's outward moving, that can be aggressive and initiatory and sometimes violent, that is dominance, that is about asserting individualism. To me, this feels like shadow Aries and the presence of Chiron and also Ingresse. So Ingresse is an outer planet or planetoid. Ingresse is a great disruptor. The discovery of Ingresse completely displaced the known order at that point of what the solar system was. Ingresse got Pluto demoted out of its planet status, and Ingresse's discovery also opened up discovery of hundreds of thousands of bodies in the Kuiper Belt and beyond. And many of these bodies have been named at this point. Many are still unnamed, but many of the names that have been given to them are names of indigenous deities and gods, which is a total break from the Greek pantheon, right? Which has been a kind of overlay of planetary codex, for a long time. So the planets have been named after the Greek and kind of Western mythic figures, but Ingresse's discovery started to open up some new potentiality. And in the myth of Ingresse, Ingresse is a disruptor. She fucks things up. She really fucks things up by exposing the vanities of the dominant order. And in the exposing of the vanities, what she does is kind of creates a catalyst for a war to break out and for discord and strife to take over. Now, we are living at a time, of course, when vanities are exposed, and the vanities of egocentric, arrogant world leaders who are clearly invested in their own supremacy, in their own dominance, in their own power, totally to the loss, right, of absolutely everything else. Because we're also living at a time when we have been told in no uncertain terms that we have a very limited amount of time to get our shit together when it comes to climate and the chaos that is ensuing because of kind of accelerating climate change. And climate change is in large part being driven, of course, by carbon and fossil fuels, and what pours carbon out into the air more than anything else is war, right? Dropping bombs on people. I don't remember the number of how many metric tons of carbon have been released by US-made Israeli dropped bombs since October 7th, but it's really significant. And we can all do our best to recycle and drive less. But if our government continues to fund war above all else, we're fucked. So we're in a predicament. Reading this chart, I'm seeing a predicament, and the 12th house where all of this is happening. Now I remember why this chart is late. I cast the chart to have Taurus in the first house. That's why, so I could read for Taurus season. So this predicament of Aries in the 12th house, because astrology is symbolic, okay? So this is the symbol I'm reading. Take what works, leave the rest. The 12th house is the place of self-undoing. It is the place where everything falls apart. And your most well-laid, well-formulated plans are going to dissolve at some point. They are going to fail. And we are living in a moment when the well-laid plans of white supremacy and, I'm going to say, like, violent masculinity and militarized dominance, they are rolling out just as planned. But guess what? The strategists are totally short-sighted, and they are contributing to their own demise. And they might think that they're going to get to Mars and have some, wonderful life on a colonized other planet. And maybe they will. But the amount of suffering that's being created in the process is absolutely devastating and entirely unnecessary. And I think a lot of us feel that way. And so when I look into this chart and I consider Mercury's retrograde, I'm also feeling the ways that a lot of folks are not able to keep on going to work as usual right now. And there's a feeling of, I don't want to participate in this. I don't want to just go along with this program because this program is not going to give me any benefit. And even though a lot of us may have felt that way for a long time, maybe our entire lives, there was not a level of social support for the kind of revolt and resistance that I believe that there is now. I don't think that we've had this level of social uprising, at least not in the so-called United States, for a long time. Maybe since the last time Chiron was in Aries, which was in the 1960s. So Mercury is about to station direct at 15 degrees of Aries, conjunct to the North Node. The North Node is one of the eclipse points. We are also getting out of eclipse season, and eclipses have been happening in Aries and Libra season since last year around this time, and they will continue through 2025 around this time. And eclipses travel, they get sequentially earlier every year. And so we just had eclipses in the signs of Aries and Libra. We had a lunar eclipse in Libra on March 25th, and then we had a solar eclipse in Aries on April 8th. And as we get later into the year, we'll come into eclipse season again in September and October, but by that point, eclipses will start to shift into the Pisces-Virgo axis. And by early next year, they'll kind of finalize that shift. And in 2025, by the end of 2025, we'll be having eclipses in Virgo and Pisces season. So eclipses happen in the same polarity of signs every 10 years, but where the North Node is, returns to the same sign every 19 years or so. So it's a special event when the North Node is in a particular sign, and the North Node is opposite to the South Node. And so the South Node is currently in Libra, the North Node is in Aries. Eclipses in their symbolism are often portrayed as a serpent eating its own tail. Eclipses are symbolic representations of periods of time when obscuration happens. And in this, there has been a lot of delineation of eclipses as malevolent or bad news. Eclipses, particularly in Aries, and solar eclipses in Aries, often foretell the fall of great leaders, or at least that's what some astrologers will say and talk about and prove to you through various circumstances where that has happened. As an embodied astrologer who works through the suggestive influence of the somatic, I'm going to say that where the North Node is, we are feeling fired up. We're feeling compulsive. There is a need to experience what's new and to break away with the past. And this feeling corresponds really strongly with Aries already as an energetic pattern. And so the North Node here is kind of amplifying and boosting this feeling of differentiation, the need to do something different, a fight kind of instinct and a fighting back kind of instinct. The South Node, which is the opposite of the North Node, is a release point. And so if we think about the North Node as where we want and need to do something new, then the South Node is what we've done a million times before. We're done with it. We know that story already and we know where it goes. We're also supported by it. You know, we have previous experience, we have previous learning, we may have inheritance of some kind. So the South Node in the sign of Libra, for me, is a symbol of releasing notions of justice and social contracts that are no longer useful. We don't want to agree with them anymore. And in this way, I think a lot of people are feeling fired up. They're feeling like they're ready to fight, and they're ready to fight for something in particular. Current events might be resonating with you in ways that are different than how they're resonating with me, but I'm going to guess that in the difference, you too might also feel like you want to fight. Maybe you want to fight me about what I just, have been talking about, if you're still even listening, right? You might feel how the collective right now is fired up. People are a little unhinged, right? Like people are pissed, people are scared, people are feeling their survival instincts kicking in. There's a lot of scarcity in the atmosphere. We have scarcity of housing right now. There's a housing crisis. We have scarcity of money. There's an economic crisis because there has been a gross concentration and accumulation of wealth by a couple of dudes, 1% and a 10% that stays comfortable, while 90% of human existence is in various states of indentured servitude and enslavement, being extracted from, being forced to labor to create the wealth for the 1%. And people are pissed off and tired about it. And we're living in a reality and in a paradigm where supremacy has been a kind of dominant mental structure. And so there's so much polarity right now. There's so much polarizing, oppositional divisiveness. And a lot of people are feeling that, and a lot of people are upset about that. But Libra also, to me, would represent the kinds of social contracts that have to do with what I'm going to call like complicit liberalism, which is like, oh, let's just all get along, and oh my God, people are being so divisive, and they're out there like, fighting for Black lives or trans lives or Palestinian lives, and, all lives matter. And like, can't we just agree on that? And it's like this inaction of complicitness that is holding on to a social contract of niceness, which is actually deeply, deeply violent. It's like a stifling and a suffocating of conflict in order to quote unquote keep the peace, that does not allow the reasons for conflict to come to the surface and get worked with. And this is what Ingresse is talking about. Because in Ingresse's mythology, she's not just out there trying to fuck shit up. Actually, she was trying to get a seat at the table. Actually, she was trying to have her voice heard. And the dominant order didn't give her the time of day. She was not invited to the party. She was not given a seat at the table. Her voice was not heard. And so what happens then to people or to groups of people who've been marginalized and oppressed and suppressed and ignored and erased and silenced? What happens? Those people become furious, and they are not at all interested in investing in any kind of ongoingness of the dominant order, because the dominant order is bullshit for them. And of course, they're going to try and tear it down. And so, of course, that's what's happening right now, because we live in a world where the dominant order has been shaped primarily by the interests of men, primarily by the interests of wealthy men, and in large part by the interests of people who benefit from whiteness, Europeanness, white supremacy, or adjacentness. And it just can't last. Too many people are not having their needs met. And this dominant order is so violent in its supremacy and takes itself so seriously, centers itself so deeply, that it will ruin and degrade anything in order to keep itself going. It will rape and pillage. It will extract all the resources. It will completely mess up the environment, bleach the oceans, etc., in order to keep its own supremacy. So, of course, we are living at a time of revolt and revolution. Okay, so Aries as a sign is ruled by the planet Mars. There's that language again of rulership. Mars is at home in Aries. Mars as an energetic is an energetic pattern that has us moving and mobilizing and feeling our force and feeling our fury. Mars energy is the reason why you get out of bed in the morning, right? If you didn't have Martial energy, you would just be a blob laying around. If you only had Venus energy, you know, it's like, and I feel that, I mean, I'm a Taurus moon, right? I feel like sometimes, and I have Mars in Cancer. So sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, I just want to be a blob, right? Like, I don't want to get out of bed. I just want to like eat treats and hang out in the sun and like just be on my own timing and do what I want when I want. And it can be hard for me to mobilize. I don't know if you've ever felt like that. But Mars gets me out of bed. And so what gets me out of bed? Necessity, desire, right? My bodily needs. Oh my God, I have to go to the bathroom. I got to get out of bed, right? It's like instinct gets us moving. So when we're thinking about Mars in astrology, let's think about instinct moving through our body. And this is instinct that is active and activating. So whatever is happening in a sign has a lot to do. It will be deeply, deeply influenced by the emissary of the sign. So if Aries is Mars, is the home to Mars, right? Then everybody who's hanging out in Aries needs to be on the phone with Mars when they're trying to figure out what to do in Aries or how to be in Aries. So now Mars is currently traveling through Pisces. And Pisces is a very different kind of landscape than Aries. So Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. Pisces is a collecting place. If we think about Aries as selfness and individuation and differentiation and bodily instinct, Pisces is the environment. You can be out there being an individual, thinking about yourself, you know, acting and enacting your compulsive drives towards what you are attracted to or averse to all day long. And you're still going to be in the environment. You cannot differentiate yourself from the environment. The water in your body, that 60% or so of fluid that's constantly moving through you, is the water that is also moving through the ground underneath you right now. It is the water that is in the air, in its molecular forms and humidity. The water that is moving through your body has been in countless other bodies. It has taken countless other forms. Water on Earth is life. Water is constantly flowing. The water in our body is passing through. It doesn't belong to us. We drink and then we pee, we sweat. You know, it's like it's ours, but it's not ours. You can be out there individuating to your heart's content, and water is still something that you need to drink. You still have to breathe the air. And guess what? The water and the air are polluted. There's a lot of toxins in our water and our air. And when we're thinking about Pisces as the environment or the atmosphere or the everything, you know, the interstitial, what we cannot actually differentiate from, we also want to consider the collective atmosphere of, you know, consciousness, the collective psyche, the zeitgeist. And so what's happening in Pisces right now, you see Mars is sandwiched between these two figures. What's happening in Pisces is that we have the influence of Neptune and Saturn here. Neptune has been in Pisces since 2011. Saturn entered last March. In 2025, Saturn and Neptune are going to be really close together, like within a degree. They don't form an exact conjunction until early 2026. And that conjunction is going to be at the very first degree of Aries, which is the beginning of a new zodiacal cycle. Neptune has an orbit of 165 years around the sun. The last time Neptune was in Pisces, interestingly, I remember looking at this, it was when the first, I think it was like the first oil well started to produce. It was also when the Bill of Rights or like civil rights got codified into the I'm forgetting the language around like US government right now, but basically, you know, that people couldn't be that racial prejudice was illegal. And I think the language was like in public and for jury duty or something like that. But it was basically a recognition of Black men. But before, you know, women or Black women were recognized as like valid contributors to society. And I don't know at this point if Black men were fully considered human. Like, this is the fuckery, right, that has produced the atmosphere that we're living in right now. The fuckery of a group of people getting to decide that another group of people is less than human, which is what a group of white men did. You know, colonizer settlers in the South. I don't know what year this was, but I remember reading about it. It's this group of, you know, plantation owners, wealthy white plantation owners in Virginia that were concerned because poor white people, poor European immigrants were organizing with enslaved Black people and indigenous folks against the white plantation owners. And what these plantation owners did is they came up with a strategy to divide people based on pigment, on melanin. And they said, you know, the poor white people would get some amount of rights, and the Black people and indigenous people wouldn't get any. They were less than human. They were like half a human or three, you know, this was actually written into law. And then this is you know, people talk about, I'm just going to go on a tangent for a second. People will talk about how astrology is fake because science doesn't back it up, right? And it's like, you look at anything, science included, and people are just out there finding whatever they need to back up their point. And Western science has done this to such a massive extent, right? And like a part of the canon of Western science and medical science has to do with proving that Black human beings, that melanated human beings are inferior to human beings that don't have melanin. There's literally, at this point, it's like science will disprove that. But at one point, that's what scientists were doing. They were writing this into the collective imaginary and making it a fact, right? Like making it something that people believed to be true. They did that with women as well, right? Saying like, oh, people with vaginas and uteruses are like, just naturally hysterical. It's not that they are traumatized and reacting against violent male domination and suppression. They're just hysterical. And then what is the treatment? Beat them. Beat them and put them into insane asylums. Ugh. Okay, anyway, so we're thinking about cyclical time, right? The last time Neptune was in Pisces at this degree was, I think, in 1875. This is like active manifest destiny moment when settler colonialism is sweeping across the landscape of North America, when Indigenous Americans are being genocided, are being forcibly removed from their land. Ugh, feeling emotional in the moment. So I'm going to take a pause, take a breath. I want to invite you to do that as well. It's like heavy content. Maybe you need to just like take a pause. So one of the ways that we can think about Neptune, one of the ways I like to think about Neptune is as the imagination of a generation. And the imagination of a generation creates what will happen in the reality. Someone recently said to me in a very infuriating way, because I was talking about, too bad the collective imagination just feels so stunted in so many ways. And this person said, too bad imagination is so impractical. And I was like, really? What are you talking about? Because anything that is created has come from somebody's imagination, right? All technology, all institutions, all philosophies, all spiritualities, human beings are imagining ourselves all the time. And this is Mercury's function, right? So when it's like, oh, it's a Mercury retrograde, this is an opportunity to reimagine, right? How do you want to perceive something? Because how we're imagining, how we're thinking about things, how we're talking about things shapes reality. Language shapes reality. Telling stories shapes history. Neptune is a symbol that's commonly associated with fiction and with film and with art and culture. It's commonly associated with states of both imagination and illusion. Why do we believe what we believe? What do we think is real? Reality and unreality. This is what we're looking at. So Neptune entered Pisces in 2011. And Saturn entered Pisces last March. Now, Neptune is talking about reality and unreality and this kind of imaginal space. In a kind of sign-based significance, Neptune is often associated with Pisces. And so Neptunian energy, like Piscean energy, is unreal. It's dissolving, it's unformed, it's nebulous and interstitial. Saturn, as a planetary energetic, is not at all about that. It is about cohesiveness, congealing, solidifying, forming, materializing. It's about boundaries and limitations and what is real, what we perceive as real, because that's the substance of reality. So while I might not think, that certain philosophies are true, if those philosophies have been at the core of institutional manifestation, then they will become part of my reality. I might disagree with white supremacy, but I live in a country, I'm born at a time when the institutions that are around me, the medical institution, education institution, the incarceration institution, right? They've all been formed around tenets of white supremacy. So white supremacy is the reality, even though it's actually a fiction. So Saturn talks about how things come into formation. Now, Saturn is moving towards a conjunction with Neptune, which will perfect in early 2026. Neptune is a great dissolve. Neptune is moving through the last degrees of Pisces, the last degrees of the zodiac. We are living at a time when the world as we know it is ending. There have been other apocalypses. There are ongoing apocalypses, right? Palestinians are in apocalypse right now, and you and I might not quite be there yet. But the world is ending as we know it. What was the notice we got the other day, right? From somebody in the UN talking about how, climate-wise, we have 2 years. We have until 2026 to really change course if we want a habitable planet for the future. Astrology, as the descriptive symbolic bus schedule that it is backing this up. Astrology is saying we have 2 years until a new world. And the very first degree of Aries is the degree point where consciousness comes into existence. We have 2 years in this particular dream of what it means to be individuals in human bodies on planet Earth. And beginning in 2026, we've got a new reality. And what that new reality is, who knows? We can go towards some really dystopic ideas for sure. I know I do. But also, we are in a time of chaos. Chaos is creative, and life happens on its own terms. And Mars, as the ruler of Aries, right, in Pisces between Saturn and Neptune, is showing us a kind of consciousness that I think is unformed. There's a huge amount of pressure, but there's also a huge amount of disillusionment. There's a feeling of urgency and I need to do something and what am I supposed to do? But then a feeling of it doesn't matter what I do because the whole thing is falling apart. And so then what can we do but actually really give everything to the dream of what we want? And for some people, that's going to look like radical activism. For some people, that's going to look like getting really quiet and tuning in with spirit and prioritizing tenderness and sensitivity. For some people, that's going to look like creating art and trying to influence culture. For some people, that's going to look like trying to coerce and manipulate others' imaginations through the use of propaganda. For some people, that's going to look like numbing out entirely, getting completely obliterated on painkillers. For some people, it's going to look like being taken over by illusion and delusion and actually going psychotic. And Pisces and Neptune and the presence of these three symbols here would speak to all of that as potential. Okay, so then the last thing that I'm going to say is, God, is that the last thing I'm going to say? I could just talk for a long time, so I'm going to try not to talk for too much longer. You know what? I think I'll say whatever else I need to say with the next image. So I'll stop sharing this chart for now, but I do want to point out Pluto up here at 2 degrees of Aquarius and the square that Pluto is making, this red line. that Pluto is making to the Sun in Taurus. And I want to say that over the course of Taurus season, Mercury and Venus will both come into Taurus. And so they will also form this square with Pluto. I definitely want to look at, okay, here's Jupiter-Uranus conjunct. Again, in our collective reading, we did a lot of delineation around this conjunction, so I'm not going to talk so much about it. But I will say that on a consciousness level, this is a period of time when a lot of innovation and breakthrough is happening. And I'll talk about this more in the next part. But then I also want to point out Ceres up here in Capricorn. And I'll talk about Ceres in a moment, but there's not a line that's drawn, but you can see that Ceres is talking to the moon in Virgo, who's talking to Jupiter and Uranus over here. So we actually have a grand trine in Earth as we get moving into Taurus season. And this is where I'm going to end this particular part of the chart reading. And I'm going to say that as an influence coming into Taurus season, like a reading of basically the birth chart of the season for Taurus, this is a period of time when Earth is being reshaped and remade. I think that there's a strong collective identification that's happening right now around identities that have been subjugated and oppressed. We have the Virgo moon conjunct with Lilith. What I don't know if I said this before, but I think I was about to say it, maybe I didn't finish. But one of the things that I've been so impressed with over the last 7 months is the way that people are really understanding how so many different sites of violence and oppression are actually linked to one another, right? And so it's like linking the brutality of the mines in Congo, where cobalt is being extracted from the earth in order to make the device that I'm talking to you through right now and our phones, but also military weaponry, right? And GPS navigation and all the tools that like Google is making right now to help enforce surveillance and death through AI, right? Like that linking of two different sites of violence might not have been so obvious before, but something is happening right now in the ways that there's a building coherence and collective consciousness of all oppression being interlinked. So whether it's subjugation of women or Black people or Indigenous people or theft of Indigenous land or environmental destruction, they're all linked to one another. And if you follow them, if you follow any of them back to their source, what do we get to? We get to the same roots of violent separation and displacement between people. We get to othering and supremacy constructs. And I think that part of what's happening right now is a reawakening of embeddedness. And so this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Taurus, I think is a symbol of the stimulation of the current collective consciousness that wants to remember that we belong here with each other on the planet, that there is enough, that if we aren't fighting each other for the crumbs of scarcity that the 1% is leaving and continuing to run ourselves ragged in circles while we labor for their wealth, if we push back through organizing, through solidarity, through mutual aid, if we start to practice a politics of refusal, this is Ceres in Capricorn, and make our own demands, I think that what we can move towards is a reality of deeper belonging, a remembering, right? A coming back together, a rebuilding of our collective intelligence and collective body that has been so destroyed by disconnection and separation in these myths of individualism and supremacy. Okay. let's look at another picture. So this is my art, a little show and tell. Thanks for looking at my drawing. I love to draw astrology as an embodied astrologer, as a creative experimental astrologer. I am not satisfied by just working with computer software programs. I need to be outside. I need to be feeling astrology in my body. I need to be looking for astrology happening in seasonal growth. And I want to be dancing astrology. I want to be touching astrology, tasting astrology, and I really like to draw astrology. So if any of you are out there and you like run art residencies, I'm just going to put this out there and say that part of my desire for my own future evolution is to actually invest more time in creative representations of astrology. And I would love to make some big maps, like really big maps of spans of time that groups of people can interact with as a kind of inspiration or instigation to experience what astrology might be as a predictive practice or as a, divining or cultivating kinds of practice. So let's go through the flow of Taurus season together. And I'll try and pick up the pieces that I didn't talk about in the last chart. And I'm also going to try and keep this recording under 2 hours. So, I might do this part kind of fast. So here we are at the beginning of Taurus season. Here's the Mercury-Venus conjunction. The same day that Mercury and Venus conjoin, Mars sextiles Jupiter and Uranus. So we have the beginning of Taurus season really with this influence of, I would say, dissolve. There is a lot of need in the first couple days until Mercury stations direct, definitely, to really balance our energy, to avoid extremes if possible. I mean, people are out there being extreme, but it doesn't mean that you need to. This is a great time to be receptive and relational. The more that we can allow ourselves rest, the more that we can be resourced for our resistance. Definitely want to give a plug to Trisha Hersey's book, Rest as Resistance, the founder of the Nap Ministry. Just amazing, visionary guide. Jupiter and Uranus conjoin together 2 days before the full moon in Scorpio. So we have really big energetic activation on the fixed cross. Scorpio, again, is a symbol of death and transformation. And as this full moon is configured with this major conjunction, a once every 14-year conjunction, and as the ruler of Scorpio is in Pisces, and the ruler of Taurus is in Aries, right? This Scorpio full moon, which is an opposition of the sun and the moon, is resonating with Venus and Mars energies. This is a period of time in which we really want to be conscious and mindful of our instincts and reactions. What is coming up for us impulsively, instinctually in our animal bodies? This is a full moon that is square to the outer planet Pluto. Pluto is at 2 degrees of Aquarius. I'm going to talk about that in a second, but Pluto is also about to station retrograde, and it's going back into late Capricorn, where it's going to finish up its return to the place that it was when the Declaration of Independence was drafted. This is the Pluto return of the United States as a kind of incorporated entity. Pluto has a 248-year cycle. I'll talk more about Pluto in a moment, but I'm going to say that when a planet is stationary, as Pluto is during this full moon, it is considered to be a very potent force. And this full moon is square to Pluto. And the message that I want to bring through for this full moon is that society seems slow to change for us in our human experiences. And in a lot of ways, it is slow to change. But in our human experiences, we don't have the context of geologic time. We're a species that's 250 million years old on a planet that's 4.5 billion years old. That's like 1/17th or something of the Earth's current lifespan. And the Earth is only about halfway through its lifespan, while we might be pretty much at the end of ours. We'll see. So society is slow to change. And it is really important to remember that change is always happening and that transformation happens internally, in the dark, and underground until it becomes visible. And this is a moment where I think that there is massive transformation happening. And a lot of it is not visible at this moment, but it is really deeply resonating across the collective landscape and into the collective nervous system. Venus is conjunct with Chiron on the same day that the sun is square to Pluto, and then Mercury is stationing direct a couple of days after that. So around this full moon, we also have a lot of pain patterning coming up inside of consciousness. This might be for you with your own life. There might be feelings of, I cannot do this anymore. I don't agree. I don't want to be like that anymore. You might be noticing, again, some of the themes that I was talking about, like, where are you expending your life force and energy for what? And what do you actually want to do with it? We are also seeing really deep resonance of collective pain patterns of separation, disassociation, and dismemberment, right? The members of, bodies, of collectives, et cetera, being torn apart from each other, from their wholeness. And this kind of pain resonating in our collective consciousness wants healing. And healing journeys ask us to go to the root of the cause of suffering. So there are really deep excavations that need to be happening right now. And a great way to use this energy and this influence is not to try and fix things, but to try and understand why they are broken. Don't look for the remedy right now, look for the cause. Mercury is stationing direct on April 25th at 15-16 degrees of Aries. Then over the course of the next couple of weeks, Mercury is starting to pick up speed and finish its transit through Aries. So the days around a Mercury station can be kind of foggy, they can be wonky. I'm going to say that when Mercury stations direct, like on the 25th, just chill. You don't need to like jump up and all of a sudden take action on the plans that you've been paused on for the retrograde or something like that. Especially because Aries emissary Mars is conjunct with Neptune at the anaretic degree of Pisces, at the very last degree of Pisces. And then Mars is about to move into Aries just about at the beginning of May. And so these last 5 days or so of April, they feel foggy, they feel swimmy, they feel kind of overwhelmed. I think that a lot of pieces are kind of floating around. We're not totally sure where they go right now. It's a time to really tune in with your intuition, with your dreams, and with the consciousness and intelligence that you can access when you rest. Like the Nap Ministry says, go lay down. There is so much intelligence that comes through when we let go and rest. And especially for those of us who are really resonating on high frequencies of fight and flight energies right now, yes, there is a lot of urgency, but if we respond to urgency with more urgency, we are not finding solutions. And so even if you're out there and you're like, I got to go chain myself to whatever to stop the traffic going across the bridge with those pipelines or whatever it is, make sure that you take 10 or 15 minutes to close your eyes and tune in with your heart and let your body rest before you go and do it. While you're there, bring rest and pause into your daily life and try and tune in with your subtle senses. Read things as symbols. The environment is heating up. And as we get into the middle of the year, we are looking at major environmental chaos, major climate chaos. That's what the climate scientists are saying. That's what I'm reading with astrology. Take what works, leave the rest. But I think that we can get a lot of information about what needs to happen to help heal the planet when we consider what the symptoms of the planet are telling us. So if you consider the symptom of an earthquake as a symbol in and of itself, and imagine what would your body be trying to tell you if your body had an earthquake, I would read that symbol as you cannot hold this form anymore. The form needs to change. If I was going to read the symbol of a forest fire in a body, I would say there's a lot of inflammation. Cut down on the things that create inflammation. What creates inflammation? Fucking stress, fear, right? Overconsumption of stimulants, including cortisol. Venus goes into Taurus right at the end of April, and Mars goes into Aries. So Venus and Mars are now entering their home signs. They get really strong when they enter their home signs. Now, this increases polarity in collective consciousness. It also increases strength and self-knowing. Our instincts and impulses become a lot more clarified at this point. And as we're moving out of the Mercury retrograde, I think a lot of us are having kind of like aha moments, like that's what I want. Especially around the waning quarter square moon in Aquarius, the first day of May. The next day, Pluto is stationing retrograde at 2 degrees of Aquarius in a sextile to Mars, newly now in Aries. 2 degrees of Aquarius in the Sabian symbol is someone defecting from the Navy. This is a symbol of betraying systems of oppression. So as Pluto stations retrograde, now it will go back into the last degree of Capricorn. It will station direct in Capricorn November 19th. And by the end of the year, Pluto will come back. It stations direct October 25th. And then by November 19th, Pluto is back in Aquarius. And then it's there to stay. It'll be in Aquarius for like 20 years until 2044, I think. Just as an aside, I think that that's the year, like 2044, 2043, that white people are supposed to be a minority in the United States. So looking forward to that day and thinking about how any of us, especially those of us occupying white bodies as I am, might help the process by betraying white supremacy today, right? Like, how can you betray systems of oppression? How can you learn about them so that you no longer enact them unconsciously? There's a great website out there. I think the cultural characteristics of white supremacy that just kind of has this amazing list and breakdown of the cultural characteristics of white supremacy, urgency being one of them, right? The need to know, the need to be right, belief in the written word, things that maybe just seem normal because they're part of the atmosphere of a supremacist environment or white supremacist environment, but they don't have to be normal, right? Urgency doesn't need to be our normal. Competition doesn't need to be our normal. There are other ways of knowing that are different than reading, texts that have been written by Europeans and validated by Western scientists. There are other ways of knowing that are just as valid, if not more so, that are just as practical and just as useful, if not more so. How can you betray a system of oppression today? Choose one, right? There's plenty. Betray patriarchy, betray class supremacy. How can you work in your somatic consciousness, in your energetic body, and in your material and practical actions and decisions? Maybe you want to divest your money from you know, the banks that are funding genocide. Maybe you want to create a mutual aid network and help people in your community spend more time with their families and less time laboring for the man. You know, lots of ways to do it. This is a time to really, I would say, betray white supremacy and capitalism by upending the idea that there are only a couple of ways to be activist. You don't have to go out and stop traffic, you know, in order to be an activist. You could. There's a great way to make something happen, right? To bring attention to things. But you can also be an activist by actually really leaning into what your natural gifts are. And if you're a person who loves to cook, you know, maybe you want to make a community meal once a month and invite people over to like talk about some article that you're reading about how white supremacy characteristics, you know, show up in the education system. Changing culture is a really important point of activism. As we get into the month of May, we are approaching the new moon in Taurus. That's on May 7th at 18 degrees of Taurus. This new moon is sextile with Saturn in Pisces, and it's also trine with Ceres in Capricorn. Ceres is stationing retrograde and conjunct with Uranus in Taurus. So first of all, this sextile with Saturn, as we lead up to the new moon, I'm reading this as a symbol of the efforts that the establishment makes, that dominant culture makes, to maintain complicitness through creating illusions and deceptions. There's a distortion of reality through a kind of like ritualistic use of symbols that is like tried and true. At least since World War II, the United States has used war as an economic stimulator, right? Like before 9/11, Bush actually had a really low approval rating. And then 9/11 happened, and guess what? Everybody's a fucking patriot, and people are going to war, right? And that war was a mistake. And Biden said it, even though now he's making the same mistake, right? It's like, there are ways that dominant culture knows how to oil these very well-oiled gears to keep the machine running. And a lot of us are unconsciously and consciously participating all the time, right? And so there are lots of cultural mythos that we engage with to keep one another in states of scarcity, in states of insecurity, feeling like we're not enough. You know, something as simple as like body hair, for example. I was reading an article the other day because I'm going to travel somewhere and I don't shave, you know, like I don't shave my legs. And I was like curious about, is this a kind of like cultural norm in the place that I'm going to go? And it was just really interesting, like reading, you know, these different blogs or threads that people are talking about body hair for AFAB people. And so many of the comments were written by women totally like insulting women who might not shave, right? Like calling them animals, like calling them uncivilized and disgusting. And I was like, wow, you know, this is a kind of like cultural symbol that in a lot of ways is meaningless, like hairless bodies. I don't know, we could do a whole podcast episode on the astrology of like hair removal or something, maybe another time. But you know, just as an example, it's like there are ways that we police each other. There are ways that we try and like assert dominance over one another that is the dominance of a worldview, like of a supremacy. And so people of all pigmentations can assert white supremacy, right? People who are identified as female or queer can assert patriarchy. We have to examine what our beliefs are and how we are enacting and creating reality for one another. So I think leading up to this new moon, we're gonna see plenty of examples. We can see them all the time, right? Of illusions and deceptions, distortion of reality through the use of symbols in an attempt to coerce people into some kind of collective mind state that is about upholding the status quo. But then this new moon is conjunct with Uranus and it's trine with Ceres, and Ceres is stationing retrograde. And to me, this is deep politics of refusal. And this is revolutionary energy and revolt. And there is a lot of this energy right now, right? There are sit-ins happening at universities. There are Google employees really bringing it into public consciousness that Google is producing AI weaponry, right? And technologies of destruction. There are all kinds of groups of people coming into solidarity with one another to push back against what they want to see ended, what they think is problematic. Union organizing is huge right now, right? Like the unions coming together to collectively assert that, you know, they won't be supporting a re-election of a president who supports genocide is enormous, right? That's enormous. And then we get to this waxing quarter moon in Leo. Leo's dramatic. And this is a moon that is square to Uranus and square to Jupiter, as Mercury is now coming into Taurus. And Mercury will soon be making its square to Pluto right before we have the Sun cazimi with Jupiter and Venus conjunct with Uranus. And so this last week of Taurus season, from the 13th to the 19th, this week to me feels totally bonkers in what I hope personally are like really liberating, creative, innovating, revolutionary ways. There is so much support right now for collective action. And Mars then is conjoining the North Node in Aries as the sun is forming its sextile to Neptune. And so I will say that as collective action becomes amplified, we'll also see, and we are already seeing, right, the increasing use of militarized suppression and the state enacting its dominance through violent control. But as we discussed already, the state is killing itself, right? Like there is less and less to invest in if we're, like trying to maintain the dominant order is becoming less and less practical. There's less and less to win for anybody that might get any benefit from it. If you're being told that there are 2 years left to live on a habitable planet and the dominant order is trying to just replace gasoline cars with electric cars without really dealing with the problem of extractive mining or the largest military on earth, or 30% of every dollar that you spend being spent on said military and like carbon offset, what the fuck? What are you actually investing in? There are better alternatives. There are futures that we can imagine that are outside of the status quo, that are beyond dominance, and all empires must fall. And so I will leave it there. I could go on. Clearly, I like to talk, but I'm going to pause, take some breaths, and get outside to connect with the earth while it's still warm out and not too hot, because we're in this beautiful season where I am of springtime. And in this moment where I am on the stolen lands of the Chinook, the Kalapuya, the Molala, many tribes and bands that have made their home and continue to make their home where two rivers meet in the Pacific Northwest of Turtle Island. It is a beautiful day, and we have not yet reached fire season. And on the West Coast, fire season is really a thing. And I think that this summer, that's what the climate forecasts are saying. Like, we're really in for a year of extreme climate events. So I will leave it like this, with, again, a kind of nod to the Taurus-Scorpio axis, and a remembering that life is finite. We are not meant to live forever. And life was never a promise of comfort. And that's part of the Taurus-Scorpio axis. Discomfort is a really important part of our existence. Through discomfort and through struggle, we learn a lot, we experience a lot, we create amazing art and poetry, we awaken. When things become too pleasant and stable for too long, people get bored and they become fairly self-destructive. Certainly we can see that in the 1%. So I'll leave it with, I'm glad that you're here. I am really grateful to be here with you at this time on Earth when we are collectively getting to experience the change of an age. There's no promise, there's no guarantee. Horrible things are happening and will continue to happen. There's such a deep pain in our world, and this pain is ancient and is historic and has a lot of twisted karma in it. But threaded in all of that pain are so many lineages of healing and creativity and joy, and not just surviving, but totally thriving outside of the status quo. Thriving in conditions of precarity, thriving when we decide to defect and queer and otherwise make space for what isn't given space in the dominant order. And for those of you that, share spaces of queerness with me, I know that one of the great joys that I have is the liberation that comes in those spaces, and how much healing and softening and discovery there is that feels absolutely thrilling and like a reason to live and keep going. So may we create otherwise futures. And that is what the whole project is about at Embodied Astrology. Starting on May 4th, we actually have a series beginning with Gabs, who is a Brazilian trans photographer and artist and astrologer. They taught for EA last year a really amazing 4-part series where they use self-portraiture as a means to learn about the cardinal angles in the chart, the rising, descendant, and vertical axis. And this year they are tuning in with Neptune at the anaretic degree, at the last degree of Pisces, this place of great dissolving. And they'll be teaching or facilitating or holding space for an experience where we look at photography and the role of media in creating reality and in uncreating reality. And we consider Neptune's transiting placement in all of our charts, as well as our natal Neptune positions and photography, to help us dream into and feel into alternate timelines and imaginations of what might have been and what still could be. As I mentioned, Sherri's series with the Femme Faces of Saturn is ongoing throughout this year. She is coordinating her series through devotional cycles of 3 sessions each. And the first cycle has already begun, but the next cycle begins on June 29th. So if you're interested in tuning in with the Bone Mother and the divine feminine of time and materiality, definitely check out that series. It's called Solve a Coagula. Junauda Petrus is leading a full moon artistic alchemy session every single month, where she's inviting us to experience and embody the full moon axis in our charts and in our hearts, and to create art from that place. Ramon Parrish will be guiding the Constellations of Conflict series later in this year. And Ramon and I, along with his partner Michelle, will be leading a on-land retreat in Colorado at the Eco Dharma Center. It's outside of Boulder, the last weekend in October. So if you want to hang out with us in person, I'm really excited for that event. I think it's going to be very needed at that time, and really deeply nourishing. And then we're also opening up a research project initiated as well by Ramon beginning in June. And this research project is participatory, and we would love to invite you to take part in it with us. We are looking at mapping the next 50 years with astrology to support our activism and movements. And astrology forever has been used by people in power to coordinate their activities, you know, kings and military leaders and things like that. Ronald Reagan had an astrologer he used to time his speeches and stuff like that. So we want to use astrology to help us in our movements. We're going to be looking at various vectors of activism. And so if you're interested in food justice, if you're interested in reproductive rights, if you're interested in abolition work, or what didn't I say, and you're interested in, come and hang out. We're going to engage in an emergent organic process around participatory research and create some kind of guide to support us in this work for the foreseeable and near future. If you want some astrology that's just for you, I recorded short horoscopes for every single sign for the season of Taurus. You can find those on YouTube, Spotify, and embodiedastrology.com in our member space. I'm very grateful if you are still here watching, listening. If you appreciate and enjoy this work, please hang out with us at Embodied Astrology. Consider becoming a member or making a donation, or just letting your friends know about it. I'm wishing you all the best in Taurus season and beyond. Bye for now.